The retired Army Ranger had dedicated his life to helping fellow veterans adjust to civilian life. When Mark Thompson was found murdered in his home, investigators wondered which grateful soldier had turned into a killer. What they discovered would expose the dark side of brotherhood and the deadly price of survivors' guilt. Denver, Colorado, November 3, 2024. Detective Sarah Collins had seen execution-style murders before, but never in a neighborhood like Cherry Creek. The victim lay face down in his immaculate living room, a single bullet wound to the back of his head. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, nothing stolen, just death delivered with clinical precision. Mark Thompson, age 45, retired Army Ranger. 22 years of service, 3 tours in Afghanistan, decorated veteran who'd transitioned into civilian life better than most. His house was spotless, organized with military efficiency. Bills paid on time, no debts, no known enemies. The perfect victim except for one thing. He was dead. Collins walked the scene methodically. The killer had been invited in. Mark had opened his front door willingly, led his murderer into the living room, turned his back, and died. The positioning suggested someone Mark trusted completely. No defensive wounds, medical examiner Patricia Kim reported. Single gunshot, close range, small caliber pistol. Death was instantaneous. Collins studied the coffee table. 2 mugs, both used. Mark had served his killer refreshments before dying. The betrayal was intimate, personal. The first break came from Mark's neighbor, elderly Mrs. Patterson, who spent her days monitoring the neighborhood from her front window. Mark had visitors, she told Collins. Always men, always looked troubled. He called them his projects. What kind of projects? Veterans, boys coming back broken from the wars. Mark helped them get back on their feet. Collins felt the case shifting. This wasn't a random killing or professional hit. Someone Mark had helped had turned on him. Mark's home office revealed the scope of his mission. Filing cabinets contained dozens of folders labeled with first names only: David, Michael, Robert, James. Each file documented a veteran's struggles, PTSD diagnoses, disability claims, job placement efforts, family reconciliation attempts. Mark had been running an unofficial support network for damaged soldiers. The files painted a picture of systematic dedication. Mark attended VA appointments with veterans who were too anxious to go alone. He drove them to job interviews, helped with resumes, mediated family disputes. Some files showed success stories, veterans who'd found employment, started families, rebuilt their lives. Others documented ongoing struggles with addiction, mental health crises, suicide attempts. Collins called the Denver FBI field office. If Mark's murder was connected to his veteran outreach work, they needed federal resources to investigate properly. Agent Michael Rodriguez arrived within hours. He was a veteran himself, Iraq War, and understood the dynamics of military brotherhood and trauma. "This kind of dedication is rare," Rodriguez said, reviewing Mark's files. "Most people don't have the patience for this work. These guys can be difficult, paranoid, angry, unpredictable." Collins had been thinking the same thing. Maybe one of them got too unpredictable. They began systematically interviewing veterans from Mark's files. The stories were remarkably consistent. Mark Thompson was a saint, a lifesaver, the only person who understood what they'd been through overseas. He never judged, never gave up, never asked for anything in return. But saints, Collins knew, often died at the hands of those they tried to save. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mark's bank records showed regular ATM withdrawals of $200 every Friday for the past 8 months. The amounts were too consistent to be random, too regular to be coincidental. Someone had been receiving weekly payments. Collins cross-referenced the withdrawal dates with Mark's appointment calendar. Every Friday notation matched: David, 2 p.m. David Coleman, age 47, lost his left leg below the knee in an IED explosion outside Kandahar in 2019. Medically discharged, diagnosed with PTSD and depression, living on disability payments in a subsidized apartment complex in Aurora. Rodriguez ran Coleman through federal databases, multiple arrests for disorderly conduct, 2 DUI convictions, several domestic disturbance calls. His VA medical records showed a pattern of missed appointments, medication non-compliance, and increasingly erratic behavior. But most concerning was Coleman's registered firearm, a .22 caliber pistol purchased legally 6 months earlier, the same caliber that had killed Mark Thompson. Collins and Rodriguez drove to Coleman's apartment complex, a rundown collection of buildings that housed mostly veterans and disabled individuals. Coleman's unit was on the ground floor, accessible for his prosthetic leg. David Coleman answered the door using a walking cane, his left pant leg pinned up at the knee. He was thin, hollow-eyed, with the unmistakable look of someone fighting demons that wouldn't stay buried. "Mr. Coleman, I'm Detective Collins. This is Agent Rodriguez. We'd like to talk about Mark Thompson." Coleman's face went completely blank. Not surprised, not shocked, just empty. "Mark's dead." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. We understand you knew him well." Coleman stepped aside to let them enter. His apartment was sparse, clean, organized with military precision that mirrored Mark's house. But where Mark's home had felt lived in and comfortable, Coleman's space felt like a bunker. "Mark helped me," Coleman said, settling into his recliner, "more than anyone else ever did." Rodriguez took the lead, veteran to veteran. "We know Mark was supporting a lot of guys. Can you tell us about your relationship with him?" Coleman stared at the wall for a long moment. "He came to my apartment 8 months ago, said he'd heard I was struggling, wanted to help. I told him to fuck off. But he kept coming back. Every week, brought groceries, helped with paperwork, drove me to appointments. Never asked for anything." Collins watched Coleman's expression carefully. That must have meant a lot. It did. Coleman's voice was flat, emotionless. "Until I figured out why he was doing it." Rodriguez leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Coleman's eyes focused on Rodriguez for the first time. "You serve? Iraq? 2 tours? Then you know about guilt, the kind that eats you from the inside." Collins felt the conversation shift into dangerous territory. "David, did something happen between you and Mark?" Coleman laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Something happened in Afghanistan. Mark was our squad leader. I was his radio operator. We were good soldiers, followed orders, brought most of our boys home." He paused, staring at his missing leg. "Most of them." Rodriguez waited patiently. Rushing a veteran's confession was like defusing a bomb. One wrong move and everything exploded. "There was an IED. Mark saw it first, started yelling warnings. Everyone scattered except me. I was adjusting the radio, couldn't hear over the static. Mark had a choice, save himself or come back for me." Coleman's voice dropped to a whisper. "He came back, dragged me away just as it detonated. Shrapnel took my leg, but I lived. The explosion also killed 2 Afghan kids who were playing nearby. Mark saw them die." The room fell silent except for the tick of a wall clock. "Mark blamed himself for those kids, said if he'd acted faster, warned everyone sooner, they'd still be alive. But I knew the truth." Collins waited. "If he hadn't come back for me, those kids would still be alive. He chose to save me instead of warning them. My life cost theirs." Rodriguez understood. Survivor guilt. "Mark's been trying to make up for it ever since. All this help, all this charity. It wasn't about being nice. It was about guilt. He destroyed those kids' lives to save mine, and he's been paying for it ever since." Collins saw where this was heading. "David, where were you Friday evening?" "With Mark. Like every Friday." "What happened?" Coleman's composure finally cracked. "I told him I knew. I told him about the kids, about his guilt, about why he was really helping me. He tried to deny it, but I saw it in his eyes." "Then what?" "He said it didn't matter why he helped, only that it helped. Said he'd keep coming every week regardless. That's when I knew he'd never stop. He'd spend the rest of his life trying to make up for choosing to save me." Rodriguez's training kicked in. "David, did you shoot Mark Thompson?" Coleman nodded slowly. "I brought my gun. Told him I was going to end his guilt. He said killing him wouldn't bring back those kids. I said it would stop him from destroying himself over them." "What exactly happened?" "We were sitting right here, drinking coffee. I told him about my plan. He said he understood, that maybe he deserved it. Then he turned around and waited." Collins felt sick. "He let you kill him?" He said if my death would have saved those kids, then his death might save me from carrying this guilt forever. The confession was surreal. Mark Thompson had essentially committed suicide by proxy, allowing his guilt-ridden friend to murder him as a form of twisted mercy. "David," Rodriguez said gently, "you're under arrest for the murder of Mark Thompson." Coleman nodded, extending his hands for the handcuffs. "I know." The investigation that followed revealed the full complexity of Mark's guilt and David's rage. Mark's personal journals, discovered during a follow-up search, contained detailed entries about the incident in Afghanistan. He'd replayed the moment thousands of times, analyzing every decision, every second of delay, every alternative action that might have saved the two children. The journals revealed Mark's systematic approach to atonement. He'd calculated that saving David's life had cost 2 young lives, and he'd committed to saving other veterans until the balance was restored. His unofficial support network wasn't just charity. It was penance. David Coleman's medical records showed the progression of his psychological deterioration. The combination of physical disability, PTSD, and survivor guilt had created a perfect storm of rage and self-hatred. In his damaged mind, killing Mark became an act of mercy for both of them. The case attracted national attention when details emerged about Mark's veteran support work. The FBI investigation uncovered similar informal networks across the country, veterans helping veterans outside official channels, often driven by their own trauma and guilt. Dr. James Harrison, a psychologist specializing in veteran PTSD, consulted on the case. Both men were casualties of war, even though only one died on foreign soil. Mark's guilt drove him to dangerous levels of self-sacrifice. David's trauma made him unable to accept help without seeing hidden motives. The trial was swift. David Coleman pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter, arguing that Mark's consent and suicidal ideation reduced the severity of his crime. The judge sentenced him to 15 years, noting that while Coleman's actions were understandable, vigilante mercy killings couldn't be tolerated. Mark's funeral was attended by over 200 veterans, many of whom had been helped by his informal support network. The service revealed the true scope of his impact: men and women who'd found jobs, reconnected with families, overcome addictions, and rebuilt their lives because of Mark's intervention. David Coleman was housed in a medium-security facility with programs for disabled inmates. His cell was decorated with a single photograph: Mark Thompson in military dress uniform, smiling beside his squad in Afghanistan before the IED explosion that changed everything. Detective Collins continued investigating veteran-related crimes, but the Thompson case had taught her that sometimes the most dangerous person to a victim was someone trying to help them. The complexity of trauma and guilt could turn gratitude into hatred, assistance into resentment. Agent Rodriguez transferred to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, specializing in cases involving military veterans and PTSD-related violence. He used Mark Thompson's case as a teaching example of how survivor guilt could manifest years after traumatic events. The 2 Afghan children killed in the IED explosion were later identified through military records. Their names were added to a memorial wall at the Denver VA hospital, along with Mark Thompson's name and a plaque reading, "In memory of those lost to war and those lost to the guilt of surviving." The Mark Thompson Foundation was established by his family to provide professional mental health support for veterans struggling with trauma. The foundation's mission statement read, "No veteran should carry the burden of survival alone, and no act of charity should be motivated by guilt." David Coleman's apartment was cleaned out by volunteers from the foundation. Among his possessions, they found hundreds of thank you letters Mark had received from veterans over the years. Coleman had kept them all, evidence of the good his friend had done, proof that Mark's guilt had driven him to save lives even as it consumed his own. The case files were sealed, but the questions raised about veteran mental health and informal support networks influenced VA policy changes. New protocols were established to identify and support veterans who were helping other veterans, recognizing both the value and the dangers of such relationships. Collins often thought about the coffee mugs on Mark's table, 2 men sharing a drink before one killed the other, out of love, guilt, and misguided mercy. The complexity of human trauma and the lengths people would go to ease each other's pain remained one of the most challenging aspects of her job. Mark Thompson had died, as he'd lived after Afghanistan, trying to save someone else. David Coleman had killed as he'd lived since his injury, believing he was worthless and that others would be better off without him. Both men were casualties of a war that continued long after they'd returned home. The retired Army Ranger's mission to help fellow veterans had ended in his death, but his work continued through the foundation that bore his name and the lives he had already saved. Sometimes, Collins reflected, the most meaningful deaths were the ones that showed others how to keep living. The case closed, but the questions it raised about guilt, sacrifice, and the true cost of survival echoed in every veteran support group and every late-night call to the suicide prevention hotline. Mark Thompson had wanted to save everyone, but in the end, he couldn't even save himself from the man he'd saved in Afghanistan. The execution in Cherry Creek had been an act of mercy disguised as murder, committed by a man who loved his victim too much to watch him destroy himself with guilt. In the end, both veterans had found the peace that had eluded them since that IED exploded years earlier in a foreign land, taking their legs, their lives, and their ability to forgive themselves for surviving when others didn't. The brotherhood that had sustained them through war had ultimately destroyed them both, but not before Mark Thompson's guilt-driven charity had saved dozens of other veterans from the same fate. His legacy lived on in every life he'd rebuilt and every veteran who learned that survival wasn't a crime worth dying for.